Okay, so we are studying Esau and Jacob. So our continuing with Genesis. Now, let me briefly run through the preliminaries here. Uh, our work here is based on the work of Dr. George M. Lanza, and he was a native of Marbleshoe in a very remote area of the Kurdistan Mountains. Um, the village where he lived spoke Aramaic and enjoyed the culture and traditions like that of Jesus and all the way back to Abraham. Okay, he's the one that translated the Bible directly from Aramaic into English. All right. He was uniquely qualified because he lived, when we say remote, we mean remote, removed from civilization until the early 1900s. And so what that meant was that they had no changes, they had no notice of anything in the outer world. And when the missionaries got there to their settlement, they wanted to know, were the Romans still in control? So, but that's what makes him unique. Now, there's lots of other Aramaic work coming out there now because it's so popular. But there's no one out there. I mean, it's scholars now and students in there saying, well, this is going to be different. But he had the experience, he knew the language, he knew the context of the language. So, and we're grateful to him because we wouldn't be doing this. We wouldn't be here today if it weren't for him. And then Dr. Rocco Errico mentored with Dr. Lonson for 10 years. And he of course, experienced many of the Near Eastern culture, customs, and traditions because just because he came to this country, he went to seminary in this country and everything, but Dr. Lonson did, but he didn't lose his culture. So anyway, so that's where we're at. We are okay. My name is Penny, and Reverend Martin is my partner. He's just kind of on a little sabbatical lately. So, but we studied with Dr. Errico for 13 years. Okay. In the last 4 years, we've been teaching. And of course, when you teach, you learn more about the Bible. We want to share the message of the Aramaic. Just we just an aside, at some point when we were doing our website and whatnot, and it's hard to explain what the message is and how it affects you and everything. But really and truly, from the Aramaic approach, it is the spiritual approach. It is the spirit of the word, and we're doing the Old Testament now, Genesis, and really and truly, I even even up to a short time ago, when you read the Old Testament, it's got so many stories in it that we understand it when but and people who take them literally don't quite get the spiritual approach, and that's what we're about. So forgive me for elaborating on that, but I think it's just the Old Testament becomes more valuable and more meaningful when you do understand the spiritual approach. Okay, and last but not least, we're not here to convince you of anything, to coerce you, to convert you, and regardless of whether you hear things that are different from your beliefs, from your religion, we're not condemning those. We're just presenting the point of view from the Aramaic. Okay. All right. Now, the theme, and we want to keep this in mind when we're doing the book of Genesis, and actually it's kind of like the whole Old Testament. What we're looking at God's role in human affairs. Okay? And so So tonight we're starting out, and I really should call this Esau and Jacob Part 1 because we have the story here in chapter 25, but then it jumps to um, we have to jump over to chapter 27 for the rest of the story. So we're going to lay the groundwork, and we're going to do one episode tonight, and then we'll finish it next week. Okay, so we start with Genesis 25, 20 to 21. All right. And Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah to wife, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramaean of Padan Aram, the sister of Laban, the Aramaean. And a little note there you see in the Bible, it has Syrian. Just to be clear, Syrian and Aramean is the same thing. And when you hear Aramaic and then you hear the word Syriac, okay, relative to the language, Aramaic language, Syriac language, it's the same thing. Syriac is a Greek word, and so the Greeks called it Syriac, but it is Aramaic. So just thought I'd clarify that. Okay. And Isaac prayed before the Lord for his wife because she was barren. And the Lord answered him, and Rebekah, his wife, conceived. All right. If this sounds familiar to you, remember Abraham, Sarah was barren for many years. And so these stories, as they go down the generation, are kind of, they're not unique. There are some differences, but it's the same story. Isaac was married to Rebekah for 20 years. She was barren for 20 years, if you can, imagine that. And of course, it just follows Abraham's story regarding the barrenness, and then then at an older age, they conceive and have a son. Although Isaac wasn't as old as Abraham, but okay. So 20 years they waited, and notice Isaac prayed, and she conceived. Okay, now this is one of the most. It's going to be the most important thing this week and next week. All right. So, and the children struggled together within her womb, and she said, "If it is to be like this, why do I live?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said to her, now, when you see these words, and the Lord said to her, you know that this is a vision or a dream. Two peoples are in your womb, and two nations shall be separated from your body. And the one nation shall be stronger than the other nation, and the elder shall serve the younger. And when her days to be delivered were fulfilled, behold, there were twins in her womb. Okay, now, this is the first time. Now, remember, Abraham communicated in dreams and visions. That is how he communicated with God. Isaac did some, but they say Isaac has really served just as a link between Abraham and Jacob in this line of things, because Isaac doesn't really play a significant role. However, Rebekah does, and this is the first time you see a woman talking to God, and and approaching God, and God speaking to her. But what was going on? What was going on briefly here with the pregnancy? Okay, she was having twins, all right, and I'm sure it was a difficult pregnancy, and I'm sure she was suffering, and said, well, you know, I just don't know if this is all worth it. I mean, I'm suffering, da 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 da. But she turned to God, and she had this, she had this dream, and we will sum that up a little bit later. So, all right, and the first came out red, all covered with ringlets of hair, and they called his name Esau. And after him his brother came forth, and his hand held Esau's heel, and his name was called Jacob. And Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah bore them. And the boys grew up, and Esau became an expert hunter, a man of outdoor life, but Jacob was a simple man living in a tent. Okay, let's sort of pick this apart. Okay, Esau and the country or the territory that Esau finally, I can see the tribal chief or what it was called, Edom. All right, and what that means, Esau, Edom, it means thick-haired, or described as red and hairy. Okay, and that's why they called him Esau. All right, Jacob. All right, Jacob does mean heel. All right, he was hanging on to Esau's heel. You remember, he is the younger. All right, and Esau is the older. But when they grew up, Esau was a hunter, and Jacob was a simple man living in a tent. And so they see the verb, the verb heal means to overreach. And so from the beginning, Jacob was trying to overreach Esau coming out of the birth channel. And so from the very beginning, he was trying to be the one, the older one. Now, okay. And Isaac was fond of Esau because he ate of Esau's game, but Rebekah was fond of Jacob. And Jacob cooked pottage, and behold, his brother Esau came in from the field, and he was very hungry. And Esau said to Jacob, give me some of that pottage or potage, for I am famished. That is why he was called Edom. And Jacob said, sell me this day your birthright. And Esau said, behold, I am at the point of death, and what profit shall a birthright be to me? And Jacob said to him, swear to me this day. And he swore to him, and he sold his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau bread and pottage, and he ate and drank and rose up and went his way. Thus, now the word here is Esau despised his birthright. And at this point in time, at that point in time in his life, he probably had no interest in that birthright. Now, what's going on here is the elder son, which in this case was Isaac, start with, the elder son inherits everything from the father and is the leader and the controller of the family. Okay. And so, uh, and so Esau, at this point, now he says, "Behold, I am at the point of death." Now, I think that he was just, he had worked hard and whatnot, and he really didn't care about the birthright. Okay, he had, had worked hard all day, so he said, "Oh, okay, no problem. That's what we'll do." Okay, and so that was done. Now, okay, back then, seemingly, uh, you could do this. Um, you could sell the birthright. All right, but we're gonna go on and do a little bit more with the birthright. All right. Oh, and then incidentally, they're talking the pottage was lentil stew. Okay. Um, yeah. So the firstborn son receives inheritance of the father and succeeds as the head of the family. Now, but here's the point. And next week we talk about the other story about Isaac and Jacob killing Isaac and stuff. All right. So selling the birthright was one thing, the birthright, but that is different from God's blessing and from what God had wanted. So birthrights could be sold, bought and sold, but not God's blessing, which God's blessing will come from Isaac. Okay. Selling and buying of the birthright has nothing to do with God's blessing. Nevertheless, Near Easterners believe that such rights can be transferred from one person to another. The little stew of lentils that Jacob gave to his brother Esau could not have changed God's mind. Now, this is the part of the story. Jacob was preordained as the heir of his father Isaac by God. Okay, that is to say, God knew that Jacob was interested more in spiritual matters and in the family heritage than Esau was. So just if you go back to the dream. Uh, we'll go over that in a minute. So, um, but from the beginning, Jacob was preordained, and the story this is a typical Near Eastern story. Okay, and the idea with the metaphors and whatnot, and the idea of Jacob holding on to the heel. It's the indication that it was preordained. Jacob was preordained to be the heir of his father, in spite of the tradition that the older son gets the blessing. Okay, from his child, and so this is the difference in the two kids, and is part of the reason why, the biggest reason why Jacob ended up with with the blessing from Isaac. From his childhood, Esau was materially minded. As a man, he was interested in hunting, fighting, and subduing other tribal people by means of his sword and bow. Therefore, he had disqualified himself as the heir of his father Isaac. He was not concerned about his family's tribal destiny and the divine plan that ran through his family. Pardon me. And remember, the divine plan started with Abraham and the covenant that Abraham and his descendants would be the chosen people to carry out God's laws and God's ways in the future. So, just presenting the picture, Esau was just kind of a different kind of guy. Now, Rebecca knew that her elder son Esau was lenient toward other tribal gods and believes. But she also knew that her younger son, Jacob, was religiously inclined for the faith of his grandfather, Abraham. The stew, pardon me, the stew was incidental, but Isaac's teaching gave Jacob strength, wisdom, and a firm belief in the family religious tradition. Okay. God chose Jacob simply because Jacob was the right man to carry on the spiritual tradition. God does not look to seniority, nor is God partial. Human beings see only the outer appearance and make their judgments. But God knows the inner workings of the heart and mind of an individual. Now, just another. Okay, so we're setting the stage for what everyone calls Jacob's the deceitful acts by Jacob and his mother, and of course, it is not approved traditionally that Jacob bought the rights from Esau. It's because people look at the Bible from our point of view, from our culture, and not that culture. So I just put in here another reference. Now, chapter 26 is, we're not going to go over the whole thing. Chapter 26 is really more about Isaac again. And Isaac has the same experience with going to a foreign territory and telling people that Rebecca is his sister. The same story, exact same story that Abraham did when we studied that. So you can kind of read that for yourself. But Genesis 26, 34 and 35, just it gives you another picture of why Jacob turns out to be the one. Okay, because and Esau was 40 years old when he took to wife Judah, the daughter of Uri the Hittite, and Bismuth, the daughter of Elon the Hivite. And they made life miserable for Isaac and Rebekah. Okay, here's another thing. Remember, Abraham sent back to his homeland so that to get Rebekah to get a wife for Isaac from their own kind, so to speak. All right, and that was part of the covenant, that you would not you would stick within the Hebrew tribes or whatever, and of course there weren't Hebrew tribes, forgive me, but you would you would stick with your own kind, not the Canaanites or these people, the Hittites and whatnot. No, and so Esau challenged that also, went and married a wife, probably several wives, to those people. All right, which, and when they say, and they made life miserable for Isaac and Rebekah, I didn't find a lot of explanation for that, but because he married someone other than the the family back home, so to speak, then that was caused the problem. And so we see in the background again why Jacob ends up with the inheritance and with the leader. And of course, we all know Jacob becomes Israel later. So now I wanted to just take a look at the dream. And again, this is going to, I really wish we could have completed the whole thing tonight, but next we're going to read the story in chapter 27. and it just got too long to do tonight. But let's look at this dream, because it really sets a tone for everything that went on, in spite of the fact that people, Rebecca and Jacob, they were deceivers, and that was wrong. And when they called Jacob this and that, but this is where it all lies. Okay, in the dream. Okay, and the Lord said to her, okay, two peoples are in your womb. All right, we know that was twins. That was Esau and Jacob. And then, and two nations shall be separated from your body. Okay, what they're referring to, the two nations are Edom and Israel. And I don't have a map here, but if you were to look, um, Esau was of Abraham's line, but Esau was the leader. In other words, he was related in this line to Abraham, but he wasn't one of the 12 tribes, and he wasn't one of the chosen. But he did have his own country, and it sat south of Israel. Okay, and so the two nations was Edom and Israel, and Edom was the Israel was the stronger one, and Edom was the weaker one. And just a little note in here, just for when you read about Jesus preceding the with King Herod, that was out of birth. Anyway, the Jesus story, King Herod, all of the line of Kings Herod were Edomites, descendants of Esau. And sometimes that's brought out because it's like, oh, okay, they were obviously opposed to Israel. But anyway, that's just a little piece of information for you. And the elder shall serve the younger. Okay, this is Rebecca's dream. Okay, and she was told in the dream, the elder shall serve the younger. And so when we get to the story again next week, where Rebecca and Jacob team up, we have to keep this in mind. Okay, the selling of the birthright and whatnot, that is our world. That's part of that's part of it's part of the material world, so to speak. And we kind of it's really like this today, but I have problems coming up with an example. But we have to keep this in mind when we see Rebecca's actions and whatnot. She knows in the back of her mind that Jacob is supposed to be the leader. All right. And what does she see? She sees Jacob is the person who's more interested in the spiritual affairs. And she sees, and he's a homebody, and she sees all of this. So when we get to the story that everybody kind of tears apart, we have to keep this in mind, that this is what was meant to be. And whatever means it took, then that's what happened. I sort of, let's see. So, like I say, Jacob buying Ethan was not part of that means to be. Oh wait, no, it was. Okay, Jacob. What do we think possessed Jacob to say, I want to buy your birthright? And so, it's kind of this. I think it's kind of this inner spiritualness, and we all experience it. So, so both, Rebecca and Jacob, from an inner point of view, knew that he was the one to carry on the covenant. And so I'm just putting down here, and next week we'll take some time to discuss it maybe and talk about it. But um, but it was preordained, and it was in Rebecca's dream that um, Jacob was to be the chosen one, and I think it's like listening to your inner voice when somebody or something in this world says no, you don't. I mean, it's kind of like maybe at birth, your parents said, okay, you're going to be a doctor, a lawyer, and they just push, but that really wasn't what they were supposed to be, and it wasn't. I just it wasn't part of the natural, the inner, God's plan. So uh, so think about the spiritual aspects of this, and we'll do the whole story next week, and with all its little nuances. Um, okay, we of course will accept contributions, and we are 501c3 now, and um, we use mostly the Genesis commentary. You will find most of this in